Because I said what was on my mind. I made a lot of enemies. I made a lot
Welcome, everyone, to a very special episode of the Science from the Fringe podcast. My name is Bryce Nichols. I'm a professor of genetics at Rutgers University, and I'm joined today by Dana Parish, my good friend, former co-member of Biosafety Now, singer, songwriter, legend, advocate for patient rights, open transparency, and what we're going to be talking about today is Lyme. And I want, Dana, if you can, what was that
I'm
you were
pointing to my book.
Oh,
With Stephen Phillips.
okay. And it's about chronic disease.
It is. It's about chronic infections that drive chronic disease. So this is like a perfect segue for our conversation today.
It is. So today we're going to be talking about, the reason this is very special is that there was a huge event for Lyme disease that took place this Monday.
Yes.
And I wanted to have you come on and give, a recap of that event and put it into historical context. And so without further ado, so Dana, please give us the background about your, I guess, Lyme story, more or less, if that's
Sure.
what you want to call.
Absolutely. So I was in the music business, singer-songwriter, and I was on the heels of signing my dream deal with Sony Music Publishing, and literally like walking up to the office and signing my contract that had been in negotiation for a few months, but also for many years had been like the goal, okay? Achieve this goal, get bitten by a tick right before all of this happens. And I was at my friend's wedding. Leads to, 4 or 5 days later, I come back to Manhattan and I see like a little bite and a rash on my shoulder, walk over to the urgent care. They say, don't worry about it. It's Lyme. No sweat. You got it early and you'll take 3 weeks of doxycycline, which is an antibiotic very frequently prescribed for Lyme and other things. And you will be better and you don't have to worry about it. But also don't Google it. And the reason why you shouldn't Google it, because you don't want to become or see any of the crazy Lyme people. So this was really a weird comment, and it just kind of like piqued my curiosity. Knowing me as well as you do, you would imagine that would be the case. So I had a feeling, though, I was very, very sick after those couple of days, and I had a feeling like this wasn't going to be so simple, and it wasn't. So I took the 3 weeks of doxycycline. I got better from the initial flu-like symptoms, but you would get better from that anyway, even if you didn't take anything. And about 2 months later, I woke up and all hell broke loose. My breast was swollen. I was like in severe pain, severe weakness. I got too weak to lift a fork and eat and walk the dog, visual disturbances, like my vision got really weird and fuzzy. I had a mad rush of neuropsych symptoms that I had never had before, which included severe depression, severe anxiety, couldn't even be alone. I was constantly ruminating about jumping out the window, but I wasn't going to jump out the window, but I really, really serious intrusive thoughts that wouldn't stop. So it was like this whole multisystemic illness. It was in my brain. It was in my breast. It was it felt like it was my joints. I was having joint pain. I was having tingling and I had a tremor. All these symptoms converged somewhat in a very, very relatively brief period of time, all that I had never had before that tick bite. And I kept going from doctor to doctor saying, I have this symptom and that symptom, and you could see rashes all over me, and they could tell that I had some measurable things or clinically diagnosable things that were not explainable other than to say it's autoimmune, whatever that meant, really. Kept saying, what about the tick bite? What about the tick bite? And nobody would really go back and say that Lyme could persist. There were other tick-borne diseases. The ID doctors were just telling me, 3 weeks of doxy would most certainly cure it. It cures it in the test tube, which ends up not to be true, and that these lingering symptoms were post-infectious, and I should just basically relax and go on vacation. And so I did. I went on vacation, and I went into heart failure. For real. It was walking around my friend's house at their farm in California, and I suddenly couldn't breathe. And I went to the hospital. I got an EKG, I got an echocardiogram, and my heart function was around 45%. Under 50 is not normal. And I was technically in heart failure. And so cardiologist said, I don't know why you have the heart of a 70-year-old man. And that started me on the mission to really find the cause. And after about a dozen doctors, somebody sent me to Dr. Phillips, Dr. Stephen Phillips in Connecticut, who who was also on the Lyme panel this week. And he knew that I wasn't fully treated for Lyme, but he also tested me for other infections that are spread by ticks or other bugs. Oftentimes, a tick bites you and spreads multiple pathogens at once. And depending on where you are located physically, geographically, it could be different bugs. But generally, where I am in the Northeast, it's Lyme Babesia, which is a malaria-like parasite. I'm sure you know all about that. And Bartonella, which is cat scratch disease. So I was tested positive for Bartonella. The rash is diagnostic for Lyme, so that was not in question. And we can talk later about how bad the tests are for a lot of these diseases. But I hadn't been treated for Bartonella. I hadn't been tested for Bartonella or any other infections. And there was no consideration for the fact that doxycycline as an early treatment still fails a very significant number of patients. So depending on what data you look at, it's like 10 to 20%, all the way up to 61% in a hospital study from Danbury Hospital in Connecticut. Johns Hopkins puts it in the high 30s. So the data ranges, but for sure, 21 days of doxy or probably even longer doesn't necessarily eradicate these bugs. So that's my story. So Steve got me better, got me out of heart failure with some cheap generic antibiotics. I took some Chinese herbs with it. I did a Chinese protocol called the Zhang protocol, mentioning it because lots of Lyme patients will see this probably and they want to know, how did you get better? Because there's so little hope and so little guidance about, everybody has a different story, but I like to share what I did because it does seem to resonate in certain places. So yeah, that's what I did. And in 2 months, my heart failure was gone. And a lot of my symptoms were gone within, 5 or 6 months. And by 10 months, I was done treatment. And, I ended up not being put on immune suppressants, psych drugs, pain medication, all the things that happen when you don't treat a wily virulent infection, a stealth infection like Lyme. It goes on. That's the premise of our book. These things go on and they cause all these diseases, neurodegeneration, dementias, Parkinson's, all those kinds of things. That's what can happen.
How long ago was that when you were being treated by Dr. Stephen Phillips, your supposed co-author of this book?
Alleged.
Alleged. We don't know.
No, he was quite prolific in writing the book with me. That was I was bitten the summer of 2014, and I met him in the end of January 2015.
When did that go from like a patient-doctor relationship to now you work with him on developing this book that eventually came out?
That's a great question. So what happened was kind of this weird, organic, cool evolution of just I got very upset and angry when I realized the greater story to Lyme, the backstory, the politics, and why so many of us were not actually being recognized and helped for what was actually going on with, these infections. And so somebody had asked me to write my story for the Huffington Post. So I wrote my story. I really didn't think anything major would come of it. And I thought, it'd be great if I could help 50 people or 25 people. And that's it. I'm going to go back to my music career. But that story ended up really getting out there. And so one of the editors from Huffington Post called and said, look, I also had Lyme. I think it's a huge problem. We got tons and tons of feedback about that story that was really positive. Let's have you do more. So I ended up interviewing some celebrities with Lyme, some clinicians and scientists with Lyme or who study or work in the field of Lyme. And of course, I wanted to interview my doctor, Stephen Phillips. He gave a brilliant interview, which I still recommend reading because it gives you so many of the most important and basic facts about Lyme. And there's a lot of data that's hyperlinked in all of these articles. I did this amazingly fascinating interview with the Christophersons. Chris Christopherson was famously misdiagnosed with Alzheimer's when it was actually Lyme. I mean, is it the same? Whatever. Lyme can cause these things. So when they treated his Lyme after 30 years, his Alzheimer's and dementia symptoms receded greatly and he was able to resume his life and career. Like he had been told to just basically go home and good luck. You can't go on the road anymore. And he couldn't remember anything. He got better enough to work for the next several years. So that was a fascinating interview. So I got to do all this stuff. And then it became like Lyme season. May is Lyme Awareness Month. And people came to me and said, do you want to do some press and you want to do some stuff with your doctor? So that just evolved naturally into my friend Christina Grish, who is an author herself, very fabulous, brilliant young woman. She called me and she goes, I had a dream in the middle of the night. You and Steve are going to write a book and I'm going to get you an agent and you're going to write a book. And that's the end of the story. And I was like, I'm not writing a book. I'm doing my music. I don't have time for this. And lo and behold, she got us an amazing agent and we wrote a book and we got a great book deal and we had a bidding war for our book. Like it wasn't just a book. It was like a roll book. So we went into that. Then of course, COVID had happened. like right when the book was supposed to come out. And the publisher came back and said, let's not do this now. You should write a chapter on COVID because you're already talking to us about what you're seeing as a similarity in the symptomology, in the political spectrum. We could sort of see the writing on the wall very early on. We said, oh my God, this is so eerily familiar. And that's how it all happened.
One of the things I wanted to get into is the issue of how controversial the disease is, generally. I also would you mention, when did you start getting affiliated with these groups, that work on Lyme disease, like the Bay Area Lyme Foundation, for example?
Absolutely. So I was asked to be on the advisory board of Bay Area Lyme Foundation probably about 7 years ago. They are the premier research organization in the Lyme world, in the tick-borne disease world. They're doing just absolutely incredible work. They're funding projects at Duke and Tulane and UCSF, many, many universities that are doing important work. And also under our umbrella is the Lyme Biobank, which I'm so proud of because we have tissue from Lyme patients and it is informing diagnostics and research studies and therapeutics and things that have come out on the market, things that are in development. So I'm extremely proud of the work. And it's also, I should mention, the Cohen Foundation was a wonderful contributor to Lyme Biobank and has been very supportive of Bay Area Lyme Foundation. So I don't want to forget that. And of course, the Fairbairn family. So I want to give credit to all these incredible people who have helped us get to where we are now, which was an unbelievable, shocking, day to find out we are doing a chronic Lyme roundtable at HHS. Like that was not something I thought I would see in our lifetime, to be honest with you. I know it sounds like, why not? Well, the politics and the history, I mean, we've been going in circles more or less in terms of, government getting involved and really acknowledging the truth of what's been going on for over 40 years. So it's been a really, really hard road for Lyme and tick-borne disease patients to see their way out and feel like there's some hope in the greater landscape, even just being believed by their families, by their friends, when the entire disease is sometimes discredited, which is like, did you ever think you're a microbiologist? You're many, many things, but among other trainings that you have is microbiology. Like, can you imagine just being like, that pathogen doesn't really exist. And if it does, it's not that bad, but it's like creating head to toe havoc. It's causing dementia. It's causing arthritis, Parkinson's, severe neuropsych stuff, PANS, autism. The list is so long. And it's like, how can that be? Well, like other pathogens, this disseminates widely throughout the body. It can. Not every single strain goes to every single part of the body. Dr. Neil Spector explained this to me long ago because he was an oncologist, and he says it's a lot like cancer. Some of the strains have an affinity for the heart. He actually lost his heart to Lyme. He had a heart transplant, and it was like an insane story. But he explained to me that, all these different strains have an affinity for different types of tissue and different organs. And so that's why we have such a broad range of symptoms.
My understanding, and I've
Mhm.
learned a lot from discussions we've had,
Sure.
is there was a lot of discussion or debate or, I mean, actually sort of dishonesty
Mhm.
surrounding this idea, which is, of course, the title of your book, like chronic, the idea of
Yes.
chronic Lyme. Is that what you would say is the major sticking point or controversy around the field?
Absolutely. So essentially, early on, the researchers, the infectious disease researchers, and people like Alan Steer were doing incredible and important work, and they were absolutely publishing on the chronicity, the chronic nature of Lyme. And so it wasn't controversial to even say it. It was on the cover of Newsweek in, I think, 1989, about how Lyme was basically, if there was no, one of the quotes in this article was, if there was no such thing as HIV, Lyme would be all anybody was talking about. And there were many, many stories and many experts interviewed in this article, many articles around that time. New York Times covered it amazingly well. LA Times. You can find these incredible archived articles where they were talking about the chronicity, the devastation, how it was endemic all over Northern California. So this whole dogma about it's only in the Northeast, it's in all 50 states. It's in many, many countries. There are European strains of Lyme. There are different strains of Lyme, but Lyme is all over the place. And so it around the time of the vaccine development, you remember Lymerix had come out in probably the late 90s. Lymerix was a vaccine that had come out, and around that time, there was supposedly this secret meeting that took place called the Dearborn meeting, and it was between IDSA and CDC. The IDSA is the Infectious Diseases Society of America, and the CDC. Everybody knows the CDC. So they met privately. Now, because IDSA is a private organization, it was not supposed to be this closed meeting, but they somehow, after that meeting and around the time of the vaccines, the entire conversation and party line changed. We're not going to say Lyme is chronic anymore. We're going to say this is a post-infectious syndrome. Insurance companies didn't want to pay for long-term Lyme treatment because a lot of it in the early days was geared to IV antibiotics. I should say I never took IV antibiotics, and a lot of people that I know who got better didn't ever take IV. So it doesn't have to be this long-term expensive and more high-risk situation where you're taking, having a PICC line and stuff. Lots and lots of people, I would say most people that I know didn't have to go that route. So at the time, that's what they were doing to get people better. And so there were many things that happened at once that converged to sort of change the story. But also, if you think about the idea that chronic stealth pathogens cause all this wide breadth of disease that is incredibly lucrative for pharmaceutical companies, diagnostic companies, you start seeing that there's a bigger story potentially at hand than just, the Lyme vaccine. So then the Lyme vaccine came out. It became known pretty quickly that it was harming a subset of patients who took it, people who took it. A lot of them were frontline workers because they were first in line, just similar to what we saw with the COVID vaccine rollout. And some of them got extremely severely crippling arthritis that couldn't be really treated. It was intractable. I know lots of clinicians like Dr. Phillips who tried to treat these patients. They were very, very difficult to get better. Some of them had severe neurologic injuries. A big meeting in front of FDA happened where a lot of these patients and clinicians testified. Very shortly after, it was quietly pulled from the market, and it was the but the official story later became that it was pulled due to low demand and anti-vaxxers. But that's Absolutely not true. I've tweeted about this many times. I posted the transcript from the FDA hearing. I've posted personal comments that I've gotten from Dr. Donald Marks, who was the clinician, PhD, MD, who testified about. He's like a vaccinologist too, I think, and he testified about what was going on with these vaccines and in why it was causing so much harm. And he advised them to strongly consider rethinking whether they were going to keep that on the market. And then they did pull it. And you know, he said they didn't want any lawsuits. They just pulled it, basically. They were worried about the future of I think there was a class action lawsuit. They didn't want more of that. So they pulled it because it was dangerous. And that's the true story. And so if you have chronic Lyme, let me just say this, sorry. The vaccine is not going to help you. No vaccine that I am aware of right now that's being developed for Lyme, and there are a few that are coming down the pike, are going to help all the people who already have chronic Lyme, millions and millions of people. For whatever reason, that information has not been widely disseminated, and that's one of the reasons why there are a large group of scientists that say this isn't really the right way to go. I mean, we don't even have a good test for Lyme, so you're developing a vaccine. We don't even know who has the disease because half the time we can't even get a proper test on them. Most people don't see a bite or get a rash. So it's a very, very difficult situation.
The general idea is that you get bit by a tick,
Yeah.
which transmits this pathogen to you. And the idea is that ideally what would happen is you could take an antibiotic and that antibiotic would kill the pathogen and now you're better. But what happens in the case, do you want to take, I guess you want to take it from there in terms of explaining why Lyme isn't that simple?
Sure. So it's hard to culture. It's difficult to culture, although it's been done. And I should say that it has been found alive in people and mammals weeks to months after they have taken, weeks and months of antibiotics. There also is a study that Steve has talked about many times that I find fascinating, where I think it was it rabbits? Anyway, they injected them with the blood of Lyme patients and or MS patients, and they developed lesions in their brain. They injected Lyme, I think, into the blood of rabbits, and they developed MS-like symptoms because MS is also highly linked to spirochetal disease. So you can't clinically distinguish or radiologically distinguish MS from Lyme. So you can get brain lesions, you can get optic neuritis. There's all kinds of symptoms that people get, and they get diagnosed with Lyme. Steve has treated tons and tons of MS patients and gotten them better. I actually interviewed a guy for Huffington Post that he got out of a wheelchair. He was a young, probably in his 30s, and he became homebound, and I think he was in a wheelchair for a while, and he started treatment. He realized at some point somebody diagnosed him with Lyme, and he started treatment with Steve, and he got better and got out of a wheelchair and was running again. By the time I met him, he was running and doing all kinds of athletic things again.
So is the idea for vaccination, is the idea that if you wanted to have a vaccine, well, I guess there's so many issues here,
Well,
Dana. I don't even know where
the
to.
problem with the vaccine is also that ticks transmit many diseases. So a Lyme vaccine isn't going to help the person that gets chronic Bartonella, babesiosis, ehrlichiosis, anaplasma. It's not going to help the people who get viruses and other parasites and other unnamed pathogens that we don't even know about. There are so many, we call them the dirty needles. We call ticks the dirty needles of nature. They really are. And if you think about it, they're literally injecting you with pathogens. They're attached to you sometimes for days. Also, the thing that I thought was great that RFK said, and that is so important, it is not true that a tick has to be attached for 24 to 48 hours to transmit Lyme or other diseases to you. If the pathogen is in their mouth, say they partially fed on another animal, say they bit your dog and then they crawled on you in the middle of the night and they bit you. if they had the Lyme spirochete in their mouth, they can transmit that to you at the bite. Willy Burgdorfer said that while he was alive. He was the discoverer of Lyme. So this is something that's been known within that world. But again, what gets communicated to the average person is like, oh, good thing that the tick was only on your kid for 13 hours. They're safe. We also know that deadly viruses can be transmitted have been documented to be transmitted within minutes. So things like Powassan, which is deadly in a certain percentage of people. So, and also causes severe permanent neurologic damage to others. So it's very, very wrong to think that a tick bite is safe because it's only been on for a few hours or a day. It's just not true.
This is to my point. I have offered the solution to all of this, which is to make ticks extinct. And I have yet to hear an argument that I find convincing that we shouldn't just eliminate ticks from the planet Earth.
I mean, you've been talking about this for over a year and I don't see any reduction in ticks. So like, come on, I'll work on it with you.
If an animal requires ticks to feed on to live, then I'm going to possibly argue that that animal also doesn't need to be on the earth. So here we are this Monday. You're talking about Kennedy making some historic comments. So can you set the stage for why this is such a big deal?
Sure. Because U.S. public health agencies, right, and other countries, this is really important to say, many other countries follow our lead. They follow our CDC. So when our public health officials say chronic Lyme doesn't exist, it's a post-infectious syndrome, don't worry about it, these patients are crazy, they need psychiatrists, even though they know it's not true, which they definitely know it's not true. But they say it anyway. And you and I know from our dealings in the COVID world that this is not a unique situation. But they're saying this stuff and it's not been true historically at all. And they know it. It informs doctors, though. Doctors don't have time to go down the rabbit hole in every single disease and read every single paper ever written. And they just say, okay, the CDC says this. I trust it. They're taught to trust it. And that's sort of how they engage with their patients. It's like it's all in your head. It's not a real disease. Most of the doctors that get into this field have some personal connection to it where it was them, it was their child, it was their mother, their sister, and it changes the course of their careers. I've seen it many, many times, researchers too. So kind of in the sense that you don't get it till you get it. So having RFK and Dr. Oz and Jay Bhattacharya, sit up there and say, this is real. You're not crazy. RFK specifically has kids. He said to have chronic Lyme. He got a really bad case of Lyme. Dr. Oz said that he can't count the number of friends and family he knows with chronic Lyme. He actually did an hour on our book, Chronic, on his show when he still had his show. And he was very engaged in the topic. He knew a lot about it. And we were just very impressed by his knowledge and concern and his connections to the community. But RFK's statements were so monumental to all of us because he legitimized millions and millions of people who are literally suffering in the shadows. They're totally disenfranchised. And some of them are bedridden. They've been out of the workforce. Sorry, my dog's doing crazy things back there. Okay. Some of them have been out of the workforce for years, young PhD students, young medical students, young attorneys, it doesn't matter. Nobody can really get the right care usually unless they are highly informed from the outset. I was told, by the way, from a friend of a friend, my friend who became my friend named Katie Reynolds. She's awesome. Katie told me, I heard that you got a tick bite and you don't know me, but trust me, you need to advocate for more antibiotics and you need to get at least double what they're giving you. And I literally thought she was crazy. So that's kind of because my doctors told me that anybody that says stuff like that to me is crazy. So that's the dogma sort of starts at the top, it trickles down. There's a certain kind of bizarre handling of Lyme in which patients are sneered at. Like I've never seen anybody sneer at somebody with HIV or tuberculosis or cancer, but yet Lyme patients who are just as debilitated are completely not only gaslighted, but demeaned and belittled by the medical community in ways that are just completely bizarre. And I've never really understood it, only to say that it feels intentional and nefarious to me. And it always did. It just felt like, whoa, this doesn't make any sense.
it was called the HHS Lyme Disease Roundtable. It consisted of 2 panels. It had a first panel that included patients, practitioners, and partnerships is what it was called, and
Yeah.
the second panel called innovators.
Yeah.
Um, what did you see in addition to just the existence of it and the acknowledgement of chronic Lyme
Mhm.
and I think as you point out, the like hearing patients' voices and saying that you're not, you're not crazy or
Yeah,
whatever. Like
exactly. Ex
what were some of the other positives that you saw emerge out of this event?
Well, Lyndon Hugh from Tufts was there. He's a researcher. Mickey Tall, who's from MIT. Obviously, Stephen Phillips. Bob Bransfield, who is a professor and a physician at where you are, I think at Rutgers. He's a psychiatrist. He's been in the trenches for a really long time too, treating patients with neuropsych disease related to tick-borne diseases. He's published a great paper with Rosalie Greenberg and Dr. Charlotte Mao, who's PDID. Rosalie is also a great pediatric psychiatrist on microbes and mental illness, and they discuss the breadth of microbes and the breadth of mental illness that they cause, but with a great focus on tick-borne diseases. And Dr. Bransfield talked about Lyme rage, Lyme psychosis, addiction, autism, homicide, homicidal fantasies, suicidal ideation. These are the topics that nobody is really talking about. He's published on all of these broadly for probably many years. I read a study that he wrote years ago, that he published years ago, called Lyme and Suicide. And it made so much sense to me because I felt that, as Allie Hilfiger said in her book and publicly, like, I felt monsters took over my brain. That's how you feel. Like, they co-opted my thoughts. I never thought that I would lose control of my mind. It never occurred to me. I like being in control of my brain and my thoughts and my feelings, and I had no control anymore. And so he really goes into that. Steve did an amazing job. Dr. Phillips did an amazing job at explaining the chronicity and how we have all this data showing that these microbes persist long, long after initial courses of antibiotics. And yet that's not acknowledged. Like, we have this one clear pathway of disease that we know can cause a wide breadth of disease. It's been found in organs all over the body and tissue all over the body. But people are just looking at blood. So Lyme is not really living in the blood. That's something that's so important to know. This is also the case with other microbes. As you know, COVID is found in tissue. You're not necessarily going to find clear evidence of it in a blood test. So we really need better diagnostics and better tools to detect these patients. Right now, the best hope we have is for a great clinical diagnosis, a great history where a doctor can sort of trace back an activity that you may have been exposed. But it's very, very hard when you have 15 minutes with a doctor and they have, a patient comes in with 15 or 20 symptoms that they've had migrating around for the last 5 or 10 years or longer. And, to try to make sense of it, it's just very, very complex. So what was great about it was that we have these major researchers from incredibly, well-regarded universities that are studying the disease. Mount Sinai, of course, we have David Petrino. Amy Prohl was there in the audience, and she's a microbiologist from Polybio, who you know. So we have these great people that are working to solve these problems. And that is something we didn't have as much of when I first got Lyme. There were, Johns Hopkins, there were some great researchers, Monica Embers from Tulane, who I was, who, she's just been a ray of hope for a lot of us for many years. So I love her. I admire her work so much. But yeah, what I took away is that there's definitely a camaraderie within the Lyme community of researchers and doctors, and they all talk and they listen to each other and they collaborate. But what I didn't think was conveyed as well as I hoped. First of all, for the future, I just want to say I deeply appreciate that they did this. Like, I can't. My heart was bursting with joy. Truly, like, I couldn't have been more shocked, thrilled, impressed that they did this. Like, it was incredible. We needed more time for some of the speakers to really hear from the front lines what was going on, what these doctors are seeing in their patients, and how they're getting better. One thing that I need to convey, Lyme can be most people get better with antibiotics, sometimes Chinese herbs and sometimes other supplements and things. But the majority of people with chronic Lyme can and do get better with these cheap generic drugs that we already have. I think there needs to be clinical trials and other repurposed drugs. I think we need better diagnostics, but for right now, we have a really good Lyme test that was just FDA cleared by this lab called IGenix. I just interviewed the head of the lab, who's a PhD. She's really brilliant. Her name is Dr. Shah. The test is called IDART. It's an immunoblot, and Bay Area Lyme, our biobank, Lyme Biobank, is actually, we provided her the samples to bring this test to market. So we're really excited about it. It's probably one of the best tests, if not the best test in the world right now. But we need everybody to be able to access these. And I was really happy that Dr. Oz talked about chronic Lyme care will now be covered. But I think there are a lot of questions about the practicality of that and what that really means. Like, I have Cigna. Can I go to a doctor now and can they write me long-term, if I needed it, antibiotics or antimicrobials for my tick-borne diseases? I don't know what it all means yet. I don't know what kind of testing. Like, the problem, too, is that on the ground floor, doctors haven't had any education about this. They've been wrongly educated or miseducated about tick-borne diseases. So then we have the issue of just how are they going to even figure this out to know where to. It's a whole other discipline. It's like a whole other specialty. It's high. It is complicated, and it does take a lot of sort of detective work to piece it all together. And one thing I thought was, I don't want to forget to mention this, RFK made an offhanded comment about toxic mold. Now, that is a very important piece sometimes of the chronic Lyme puzzle. Also, long COVID. I don't want to neglect the fact that these, chronic illness is often a multiple hits situation. So you can get exposed to a bunch of tick-borne diseases. All of a sudden, it's unleashed your sensitivity to toxic mold, which you may have had tolerance for a long time. Toxic mold makes people really, really sick, as it was put to me by an ID doctor who is very expert in this area. It's a true poison. You are truly being poisoned. So again, we have to look at the whole picture of what's going on with chronically ill patients, especially in the vector-borne disease world, because it's not always just Lyme. It's often Lyme plus.
What would you have liked to have seen that didn't happen? Or what do you see as some of the potential? Did you dislike anything, perhaps? Or did you see any omissions?
I think that RFK is earnest in wanting to do this. I think there are a lot of obstacles in the way of solving chronic disease and chronic illness, as you know. So I think Lyme is certainly under that umbrella. What I would like to see going forward is conversations with frontline, direct conversations with frontline physicians about what they've been doing for the last 20 to 40 years to get these patients better, what they feel what tools they need to help them get better more quickly, and get more people better. Not everybody is successful when they treat, even if they have a pretty clear diagnosis of tick-borne disease. Sometimes they just don't get better. We don't know why. We don't always know why. Yes, there can be the complicating mold or the complicating some other issue, but we don't always know why. And we want to be able to help. I just think from a practical standpoint, to have a smaller panel that is able to give more information and sort of educate a little bit better. I don't know that the urgency, I had some friends watch it that don't have Lyme, and I wanted to know their opinions and their takeaway. They didn't get the urgency of the situation. Like, some of these patients are dying. Some of these kids can't go to school anymore. They're totally bedridden, or they're totally homebound, or a light switch went off in their brain where they were happy, healthy, normal kids one day, got a tick bite, and boom, rage, throwing things, barely talking anymore, can only eat 3 foods, will only eat 3 foods. Their sleep schedule is completely flipped. We call that PANS, and some people call it PANDAS, which is related to strep. But a lot of these infections, these infections cause brain inflammation, and brain inflammation can cause this whole enormous list of symptoms like that. And so we see these, happy, healthy, cheerful kids go, their heads are spinning, basically. I have a number of close friends who have kids that have PANS. And some of them have gotten way better with treatment, and some of them haven't. This needs to be conveyed. Like, these kids, these parents, these families are suffering to a degree that I've never seen, and it is prolonged. It's not like a couple weeks or a few days or a few months. It can go on for years and years. I'm thinking of a really close friend of mine, 7 or 8 years like this. And her son was not able to ever go back to school after he was 14. He's a wonderful kid. I've known him since his mom was one of my best friends from college. I've known him since the day he was born. There are literally pictures of him as an infant laying on me in my apartment and sleeping. And that's how long I've known him. He's the sweetest kid. And then he got Lyme, and all hell broke loose for him. And he got every symptom in the book, but most of his symptoms were neuropsych. And it was very scary. We were worried he was going to commit suicide. Very, very scary times.
Dana, I don't remember if you said this before, but what does PANS stand for? What's that abbreviate?
So PANS stands for Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome. And oftentimes that is actually related to Bartonella. That is what clinicians find and tell me for years over and over, including neurologists and other people that treat kids for these issues. And I'm focusing on kids because I think kids are more susceptible. More kids get Lyme and are diagnosed with Lyme every year, but it also happens to adults in very similar ways. And I'm focusing on the neuropsych stuff, but there's also severe arthritis, RA, MS-like symptoms, and Parkinsonism, and those kinds of things, severe memory loss and brain fog. I don't love the term brain fog because it doesn't really capture the horror of not being able to think. And I can just say from my own personal experience, I went from being really clear thinking and a songwriter who is like excavating words and music all day, in intricate ways, and to not being able to really form a sentence, not remember where I was, getting lost in familiar places. I remember one morning I lived in New York City. I still live in New York City, but at that time I was living in this doorman building in Chelsea for a long time, and I knew the doorman for like 10 years. And I mixed up all their names, and it was just very embarrassing. I didn't even know I did it until after. And it's really a horror show to lose your mind and to lose your body and to think. For me, I just thought, I'm just going to die like this. And what's going to happen to my parents and my family and my loved ones? Because I'm going to die mysteriously because I was on heart. Nobody would tell me what was wrong with me. And it became incumbent upon me to figure it out, to continue to go to doctors who were telling me it's in your head or it's post-infectious. But I knew it wasn't, and I have that rebellious thing in me, which is like, I'll show you, I'll get better and I'll come back to you about that, which I did, and it's been quite a journey to go from that patient to then standing on stages, educating those doctors, which I've done a lot of, and I continue to and do forums like this where I can talk about the seriousness of the issue and, the crimes against humanity of ignoring it for the last 40-something years and pretending it's something that it's not, and pretending that, that these people are crazy, it's all in their head, and that the vaccine failed because of anti-vaxxers and low demand. Like, none of that's true. None of that is true at all. And I want to validate that for people who are watching and who know that.
Seems like this is a win for the Lyme community and something that would not have happened had it not been for Kennedy taking over HHS.
I think so, because it's never happened before. I never really heard any public health officials talk about or at that level address chronic Lyme. The only time I've ever heard people address chronic Lyme was when we were doing press and doing certain interviews, and we would go to them for a comment, or like the organization would go to them for a comment, and they would just discredit everything that we would say. and they would deny it. As you know, because you made the introduction to Dr. Redfield, Robert Redfield, former CDC director, I did get him on the record. For the first time, a CDC director went on the record about chronic Lyme, but he was already not in charge of the CDC anymore. And he acknowledged the problem. And he acknowledged, like, these patients need an apology and it's horrible what's happened. But the CDC was definitely highly involved in the miseducation of the public, along with the IDSA and others.
Moving forward, what will you be looking for in order to see a true commitment? What will that look like? What does that future look like?
In a perfect world, insurance would cover pretty comprehensive treatment, which could include things like Chinese herbs. It would include things like antibiotics and other antimicrobials. It may include things like acupuncture. It may include peptides. I don't know. Each person is going to have a different course and a different way of treating. There's more than one way to skin a cat, but I do hope that insurance starts covering this and starts educating that from a top level, the education of doctors starts trickling down, because that's going to be critical on the front lines. I'd like to see NIH. The private sector has done an incredible job at funding research for Lyme. Okay, Bay Area Lyme has been one of the ringleaders of that. So I want to mention that. And NIH has given some money, but we really need a lot of funding, a lot of money to cure and solve this crisis. It is a global pandemic. It is not just a little Northeast problem. And these patients need help, and it needs to be understood. A tick bites you, you get Lyme, and it disseminates to your tissue and to your organs. It is not swimming around in the blood. That's not where it's found. So you're getting these negative antibody tests. The antibody tests are terrible. The tests miss more than 50% of cases. Also, there's a certain amount of people who don't make antibody at all. And we don't know why, do they have immune tolerance because they were born with congenital Lyme? That's a whole other topic. It's a big, big disease, and it needs big attention and money and brains on it.
My solution, long-term, extinction of the ticks on planet Earth seems to be the best way to get rid of it.
I don't understand why nothing has been done about the tick problem, or at least
we don't need tick. Dana, we agreed.
Right.
We couldn't come up with a reason for ticks to be on planet Earth. And that, to me, could long-term, it saves some money. It is refreshing to see HHS hold this event. But at the same time, as you and I both know, as skeptics of anything, these things can be staged.
Yes.
There can be what you introduced me to, the concept of a limited hangout, that
unlimited hamburger, as you call it.
Unlimited hamburger, as I believe you referred to it. And that, I guess, so we need to always be, diligent, skeptical, and I don't want to say like trust, but verify to use.
Well, what do you want to explain what limited hangout is?
Well, no, because that's your term, and I would like you to explain what limited hangout is, because I thought you were saying limited hamburger when you first introduced it
Unlimited.
to me. So what is a limited hangout, and why did I bring it up?
Well, I think you brought it up because you're watching this thing unfold, and you're like thinking what a lot of people are thinking: is this real? Is something great going to come out of this, or is this going to be falling flat and disappointing? And in 6 months, or 6 years, we're not going to feel like anything meaningful came out of it. I'm remaining hopeful, and I personally would be very, very happy to talk directly to some of the officials. I will be talking to some of them soon. I would like to talk to RFK directly, and I would like to get involved in helping move the conversation forward and having conversations between the Lyme community and the public health officials so that they understand the scope of the problem and what we need the money for exactly, who they should be funding and stuff like that. But limited hangout is basically a term that I love. It just kind of encompasses so much of what we see. It's basically you get a certain amount of truth from, a certain person or a certain body of an organization, and they earn your trust because they're talking about this thing really openly, and you're like, oh, I can't believe they said that, and you're hanging on every word, and then all of a sudden they balm you with false information, misinformation, false flags, and so you then get destabilized and you don't know what to think, and you're thinking half right and half wrong. And that's also a way they can make you look cuckoo by telling you things that are totally crazy and off the track of what's really true and to throw you off the track. And so it's sort of, you can get discredited pretty easily if you start parroting some of these things that are said without actually looking into them and making sure that they're true.
The idea is that the public's attention is directed into specific narratives rather than, looking at everything, perhaps. Is
Yes,
that fair?
exactly. A topic that came up, Dr. Bruce Patterson, who I think is a pathologist who's come onto the scene. He also works a lot with long COVID, and he talked about finding fragments of proteins from Lyme in the monocytes, which is blood cells. And, that's another pathway that he thinks could be explored for chronic disease. Why are so many patients still so sick after they treat with a short course of antibiotics? That's a really good question. I think that should be fully explored and investigated. But we also need to know, are those fragments there because there is still bacteria living in tissues that hasn't been recognized at that point? Like, I don't know the answer. There probably is more than one mechanism to chronic Lyme disease. There's probably a few, and we want to know what all of them are so that we can target them in the right ways. So again, I think all things are on the table, but we know for sure that the pathogen can be chronic. So we have to definitely start with killing the bugs that are making us sick. And it doesn't take a lot of them, by the way. I don't even know, there's a question about whether they're even replicating or they're just being harbored there in the tissue, in the brain and the heart. I don't know the answer to that. But I
Okay,
want
so
to,
we'll keep our
okay,
yeah,
sorry. A limited hangout. I looked it up because I love the way like it's described in
right.
in Wikipedia. A limited hangout or partial hangout. We don't call it partial hangout. Okay, that's not a
No.
term we use. Is a tactic used in media relations, perception management. That's creepy. Politics and information management. The tactic originated as a technique in the espionage trade. And now it is in full use.
For the record, you have many times
Mm.
accused me of being part of some limited hangout. Is that can we just address that?
Um,
I might be. And
I
honestly,
Listen,
who knows?
we're very good friends, and we're probably gonna have dinner in like 3 days together. So I say this with love. I'm not sure if you're a spook. I'm still not sure,
Thank you.
but it doesn't
Totally
matter.
fair.
It doesn't matter because I love you anyway. But I do think I do think like the world that you and I have lived in for the last couple of years has been so mind blowing, right? I mean, don't you think it's so confusing? Like, who's who? Who's really who? Who's really limited hangout and unlimited hamburger?
I, I agree. And I think, Richard Ebright, another person who's frequently accused of being a limited
Not
hangout
by me, of course. No, of
well,
course not.
Biosafety Now, when we launched, I saw accusations that we were some sort of controlled op or limited hangout for vaccine manufacturers, which I thought was pretty cool.
Well,
If we were, I mean,
I
I
I
wish
just
we
want to
weren't.
say something about Richard E. Bright. I have a lot of tremendous respect for Richard, and I interviewed him for my own podcast, which you helped me launch, the Dana Parish podcast. But I just want to say utmost respect and admiration for Richard. He has been sometimes the lone voice in this world of trying to get regulations around gain of function, bioweapons research, whatever you want to call it, which is so, so, so critically important. He's been testifying since early 2000s, and I find him tremendously helpful. And, he just knows the history better than anybody. So, all joking aside, I deeply admire and appreciate him and all that he has done to inform people. And, sometimes he may not do it in the most gentle way, but he gets his point
Right.
across. And I don't either for that matter. And let's face it, neither do you. So we do our best.
Hey, we do our
We do
best,
our
but at
best.
least to our knowledge, we're not limited hangouts yet
I
or whatever.
definitely listen. I have been waiting for
You
somebody to
might
come and
be.
pay me off for years, and like it's not happening. Like
Yeah.
if anybody's watching,
Yeah.
y-
I,
you haven't
that-
tried to shut me up. Like I'm kind of surprised about the whole thing, to be honest.
so Dana, you're now asking for someone to pay you to be
Correct.
a limited hangout.
A
And
lot
if
though.
anyone's out there,
I don't want like a small amount of money. I want a large amount of money. Yeah, exactly.
okay, I'm sorry. That's not,
Is
I
that
don't
not part of
actually,
the
no
discussion?
problem.
The way that you and I met is because I was already on my own talking about all this stuff and expressing my concerns and in trying to rally the troops into caring about some of these issues. And so we were brought together by these principles and by our shared passion and mission to do something good for the world. So I think that needs to be said. All kidding aside about me wanting to get paid off, that's just being silly.
But also, when at the beginning of our discussion, we first started talking about stuff, I thought you were crazy about a lot of things, and it turned out you were right, which I must. But I
I'm
will
so
also say
pleased right now. Oh my God, can we just take a moment? Thank you.
you were critical. I will say that you and Yana Lamberdinu.
Mhm.
I think. I hope I
I
didn't
love her
mispronounce
so
her name.
much. Yeah.
Were critical to launching Biosafety Now. In fact, like you were too right at the start.
Wow. Thank you.
But it was your meeting with Richard that actually uh, made it happen, really, because Richard fully committed to it after that meeting, after seeing people, because it really was like I was saying, there are people out in the public that want to join this thing.
Yeah.
And so that meeting was actually instrumental in getting Biosafety Now to happen. But then once we were a thing and we had like whatever, 20, 30, from at various iterations, or 20,
Yeah.
30 of us,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
the idea was that, like, okay, certain members are liabilities, right?
Mhm.
Like, and at this point, who cares?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, think of how absurd that is anyway. Like,
It
the
is.
group is about a mission, not about the individual. So the point was that, like, we had an issue we all agreed on. We could agree on different
Yeah.
things. That's
Right.
what made that work, because we had a lot of disagreements on all kinds of other
Sure.
issues, but together we were all in lockstep on believing that dangerous gain-of-function research was an existential threat to humanity.
Correct.
And so there was actually a nice model for how you can have people with diverse opinions on other subjects agree on something. But, anyway, is there any other thing that you want to say before we sign off?
What I want to end by saying is that I am deeply appreciative. It was a historic moment. It was a historic roundtable. I hope to see some follow through, serious follow through. And I want to reiterate, I would like to help if there's anything I can do on behalf of Bay Area Lyme Foundation and Biobank. Like, I am here and I want to collaborate with you guys and try to facilitate. We need help urgently. It's not casual. It's not a small amount of people suffering. It's every single age group, every single economic group. And it costs the economy literally billions of dollars to have people with chronic Lyme just staying sick. There was a study by Johns Hopkins that talked about, I think it's like a couple $1 billion a year. So it's very, very significant in many, many ways. Most of all, what we want to do is ease suffering and make Lyme easy to diagnose and simple to cure. That may not be ever the case that it's so easy and so simple, but we could certainly make it a lot easier and a lot simpler. And that's really where I am with everything. Is I just want the best. And I want to just lastly say the one thing that I didn't mention that's really important is that COVID seems to unmask tolerance for Lyme. Other infections, we know from their studies on EBV, and everybody talks about EBV, and that's great, that's important. But Lyme is another, and Bartonella, and also toxic mold tolerance. These are all coming to the surface in the face of COVID, chronic COVID, long COVID, whatever you want to call it. It's really, really common. And several years ago, when people first started getting sick and not getting better from COVID, a lot of them the Lyme patients were saying, my Lyme symptoms came back. They would return to doctors like Dr. Phillips, and they would get retreated for Lyme, and their so-called long COVID symptoms would go away. And so now there are researchers studying the overlap and the fact that these other pathogens are reactivating in the face of COVID and also COVID vaccine. So it's really, really important that people know this so that they can get tested for or evaluated for vector-borne diseases and toxic mold and other infections too in the face of long COVID, because I know that there is a percentage that is getting better, has gotten better, and that can still get better. I have a lot of hope. I just don't want people to think there's nothing out there. There's no more answers. It's all COVID 100%. And for some people it might be, but for others it may be more complicated than that and maybe actually a little bit different.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dana. And the last thing, will you tell people where they can find your your own podcast?
Well, you can't Google it because I'm so shadow banned. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. But yes, you can find the Dana Parish podcast on iTunes, on Apple Music, on Spotify, and on YouTube. And I have some great interviews coming up in the new year. I just wrapped a few of them, and I'm super excited for you to watch them. And I have a couple of really, really amazing ones booked for the early in the new year. So thank you for helping me launch the podcast. You've been instrumental. And so I helped you launch Biosafety Now, and you helped me launch the Dana Parish podcast. And I'm deeply indebted to you for doing that for me. I need some funding for it, though. So I'm putting that out
Okay.
there. I need sponsors because traditional sponsors are, they're a little bit funny about talking about some of the stuff that I'm talking about with Richard E. Bright and Dr. Redfield and James Giordano who's the neuroweapons guy from Georgetown, and he discovered the mechanism for the Havana syndrome. That was a totally fascinating interview too. So people are a little bit not sure, how to think about these topics, and I'm hoping that I'm making them more accessible and I find them like utterly, endlessly fascinating. So anyway, thanks for all you've helped me do to accomplish that.
Yeah. So if anybody is out there looking to fund a podcast on important issues around science, public health, and bioweapons, what else?
Chronic Lyme, chronic illness, long COVID, millions and millions suffering, no answers. We need to actually really all work together. And politics aside, like I'm not political. I am not affiliated with anyone. I just want to work with anybody who wants to solve these issues. So for me, all the noise, what was what bothersome, and this is important to say, sorry about going back to this, but the media framed the Lyme Roundtable. I saw a horrible article by USA Today, for example, and I think I saw one in Stat. I saw another one in this small publication called The Sick Times, which I don't understand what's going on there, that they would frame it. They all start with like RFK, is a kook, and he thinks that Lyme is a bioweapon, but that's been debunked. That's not really how, that's not a change. That's how the media always frames it. It's always, chronic Lyme is always being somehow, smeared, discredited. So they have to start this wonderful, event that happened for us. We've been suffering for 40 freaking years, right? And they have to open the articles by slamming RFK and Dr. Oz. Now, politics as usual, like I get it. But you guys have to understand, if this was your kid in bed dying that couldn't go to school for 5 years and that was on IVs and couldn't open their eyes anymore and couldn't play with their siblings and couldn't go to their prom or their graduation, you wouldn't be doing that. Like, think about the patients and stop thinking about politics and stop spreading propaganda, because that's just not fair. At the end of the day, that's really, really doing a huge disservice to people who are suffering, and there's millions of them, and it could be your child, and politics shouldn't be playing this much of a role in the conversation about an infectious disease that harms millions and millions of people.
Thanks for those words, Dana. Thank you very much for joining me. This has been Bryce Nichols on Science from the Fringe. Take care, everybody.